Algebra 2, Chapter 4, Section 2, Solving Quadratics by Factoring. So solving quadratics by factoring, there are 4 steps. We want to first move all terms to one side and set the equation equal to 0. Then we want to factor. Set each factor to 0 and solve for each x value. Last, we want to write our answer as a solution set, x equals, and then our x solutions. So our first equation is x squared plus 9x equals 0. So we're going to factor. We're going to look for the greatest common factor that goes into both elements. So in this case, an element is x squared, and the other element is 9x. So the greatest common factor that goes into both elements is x. So we set x outside of the parentheses and we divide each element by x. So x squared divided by x equals x, and 9x divided by x equals 9. And then we set that equal to 0. So now we want to set each side equal to 0. And what that looks like is going to follow up. We're going to set the first x equal to 0, and we're going to set x plus 9 equal to 0. So I set up the lines and kind of like a little T-chart, so I make sure I set both sides equal to 0 and solve for both sides. So x equals 0 and x plus 9 equals 0. Well, since x equals 0, that's pretty much done. There's nothing else we can do with that, so that is the answer to one of our solutions. Now we have x plus 9 equals 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and solve for x. I'm going to subtract 9 from both sides and get x equals negative 9. So my solution set is x equals negative 9 and 0. Now I have another equation. I have 4x squared minus 8x equals 0. I want to first factor. So what goes into both elements? Well, 4 goes in both, and an x, they both have an x, so 4x. So I set 4x outside of my parentheses, and then I divide 4x squared by 4x, and I get x. Next, I divide negative 8x by 4x, and I get negative 2, and I set that equal to 0. So now I want to set each side equal to 0 again, like we did in our last example, with like that kind of T-chart looking thing. So I have 4x and I have x minus 2 equals 0. So 4x equals 0, and then x minus 2. Then I have x minus 2 equals 0. So I take the first side and I divide each side by 4 to get x by itself. So 4x divided by 4 equals x, and 0 divided by 4 equals 0. Next, I take on the other side, I have x minus 2 equals 0. So I want to get x by itself on the left side of that equal sign. So I'm going to add, do the opposite, and I'm going to add 2 to both sides. So x equals positive 2. So there are my two solution sets, or my two solutions for x equals 0 and x equals 2. So my solution set would be 0 and 2. Now I want you to do numbers 3 through 8 on your own. Go ahead and pause this video so you can go ahead and work out those questions. And then once you're ready, go ahead and play the video and you'll find the answers. Now that you've worked them out on your own, here are the answers to those questions. Number 3, I have x squared minus 4 equals 0. So my solution set, once I set each side equal to 0, is negative 2 and 2. Number 4, I have 9x squared minus 25 equals 0. So once I factor that, and I set each side equal to 0, I get x equals negative 5 over 3 and positive 5 over 3. Number 5, x squared minus 10x plus 21 equals 0. So I can go ahead and factor it, set each side to 0, and my solution set is x equals 3 and 7. Number 6, 2x squared minus 2x minus 24 equals 0. Well, this one I'm going to have factor out a 2, and then I'm going to divide each side by 2. Well, this is going to have 2 on the outside, so I'm going to have 3 elements that I set to 0. 2 equals 0. Well, it doesn't equal 0, does it? So that's not a solution. Then I have x minus 4 equals 0, so x equals positive 4. And I have x plus 3 equals 0, so to get x by itself, I subtract 3 from both sides, and I have x equals negative 3. So my solution set is negative 3 and 4. Number 7, 3x squared minus 13x minus 30 equals 0. Once I go ahead and factor this, you see the work there, and I set each side equal to 0. Then I have x equals negative 5 thirds and 6. Number 8, 6x squared plus 5x minus 4 equals 0. I have x squared plus 5x minus 24 equals 0. So I go ahead and I factor it, and I set each side equal to 0. Now my solution set is x equals negative 4 thirds and 1 half. Now we are going to look at some graphs. So we're representing quadratic equations in the standard form, vertex form, factored form, and the graph form. So with our first one, we have function of x squared minus 8x plus 15. So in the vertex form, I'm going to look for my vertex, or in this case, the answer is 4 and negative 1 for my vertex. And then I'm going to look for my axis. Okay, my axis is where my line first crosses my 0, or my x-axis. Okay, so my x squared, I want a vertex, in my vertex form, is going to be the function of x equals x squared minus 8x plus 15. I'm going to put a parenthesis around that. Okay, then in vertex form, you divide your b value, or in this case, negative 8, by 2. You always divide it by 2. So negative 8 divided by 2 equals negative 4. We have then we take negative 4, or our answer, and square it. So that gives us positive 16. So the function of x equals x squared minus 8x plus 15 plus 16 plus 15, and then we're going to subtract 16 from it. Because remember, we're subtracting 16 because we got 16 from the prior equation. So we want to take that back out. So once we did that, we have x minus 4 squared minus 1. So our vertex is going to be positive 4, because when we set x minus 4 equal to 0, we're going to get a positive 4. And then we have x equals negative 1. Our axis is going to be that x equals 4. So our factor form is function of x equals x minus 3, x minus times x minus 5. So we're looking for factors of 15 that when added together will equal negative 8. But when you multiply them, will get us positive 15. In this case, it's negative 3 and negative 5. So our roots are x equals 3 and 5. Okay. And those roots are where the line crosses the x-axis. Our vertex is where it reaches its lowest point. So you see it dip down, or the end being right around here. That is our vertex, and that is going to be 4, where x equals 4 and y equals negative 1. And that's going to be our axis too, where it's symmetrical, is at x equals 4. Here's another one. We have our standard form, our vertex form, our factor form, and our graph. We have the function of x equals negative 2x squared minus 4x plus 6. Okay, so in our vertex form, we go ahead and we take out the negative 2. So negative 2 times x squared plus 2x equals plus 6. Okay, so we separate that negative 2 from the x squared to get x squared by itself, to get our a value to equal 1. Okay, so then we take our b value, which is that 2 and the 2x, and we divide that by 2. In the vertex form, we always divide the b value by 2. So 2 divided by 2 equals 1, and then we take 1 and square it. 1 squared equals 1. Now we have the function of x equals negative 2x squared plus 2x plus that 1 plus 6, and then we add 2 back in. Okay? Why do we add 2 back in? Because we have negative 1 or positive 1, and remember in the prior one we subtracted that number, that square number. Well, we have that negative 2 that's on the outside. So when we subtract negative 1 and we have a negative 1 times the negative 2, we get a positive 2. So we're going to add 2 this time to both sides. Okay? Now we have negative 2 times x plus 1 squared plus 8. 6 plus 2 equals 8. So once you go ahead and solve that, and then you go ahead and graph it, so this is our factored form, we have our vertex will be negative 1 and positive 8. Okay? Here's our negative 1, here's our positive 8 right here. And then our x-axis will be where it's going to be symmetrical, so the same on both sides, and that is at negative 1, where x equals negative 1. Now our factored form, we have the function of x equals negative 2 times x squared plus 2x minus 3. It's minus 3 because we took positive 6 right here and we divided by negative 2. So our function of x equals negative 2 times x plus 3 times x plus 1. So our roots are going to be, when we go ahead and set each element to 0, well, negative 2 does not equal 0, so that's not going to be our solution. We have x plus 3, so when we take x plus 3 equals 0, subtract 3 from both sides, we have x equals negative 3. Now we have x plus 3 equals 0. So when we set that to both equal to 0 on both sides, and we're going to have x equals 1. Our last one for this part of our video is going to be this equation when the function of x equals negative x plus minus 7 times x minus 7 plus 1. We're going to go ahead and find the perfect square. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get it into a quadratic equation where x squared minus 7x minus 7x. So when you take negative 7x, negative 7 times negative 7, you're going to get a positive 49. Then we have our 1. So we have negative x squared minus 14x plus 49. So we set it up like that so we could get our quadratic equation. And then we have plus 1. So we go ahead and combine all like elements, and don't forget about that negative sign right here in front of the equation. We go ahead and distribute that negative sign as well, resulting in negative x squared plus 14x minus 48. Our vertex form is going to be function of x equals negative 7x minus 7 squared. It's squared because we have two of them, two of the same, plus 1. So our vertex is going to be x equals positive 7 and x equals 1. So our x-axis, or our axis, is going to be at x equals 7. So it's going to be right here. Okay, our vertex is where it peaks in this case. So our vertex is going to be at 7 and 1. This is where our parabola peaks. Now we have our function of x equals negative 1 times x squared minus 14x plus 48. We have a function of x, then we go ahead and factor it. When we factor it, our roots of x equals 6 and 8. And our roots are right here where it touches the x-axis. Go ahead and continue watching for part 2 of this section. Thank you.